When people take on something long-term, whether it's losing weight, reading more, or learning a new skill, most of them go through almost exactly the same process. At the beginning, the enthusiasm is highest. Every day feels energized. You feel like this time you'll really see it through. But after a while, the novelty starts to fade. That energy, that drive begins to quietly disappear. And then, before the thing is even finished, you find yourself struggling to keep going. A lot of people chalk this up to weak willpower. But over 2,000 years ago, the ancient Chinese had already noticed that this might not be a problem of will at all. They captured this pattern in a phrase of just 9 characters. 一鼓作气, 在shuai, 三而竭. The first drumbeat, spirit at its peak. The second, already fading. The third, spent. This phrase comes from a battle in ancient China. During the spring and autumn period, 2 armies face each other. Drums sound, soldiers charge. The ancient Chinese used this to describe how a soldier's spirit changes on the battlefield. But what it's really talking about is something about human nature. A person's qi, their inner energy, will naturally decline. The ancients never demanded that people stay fired up indefinitely. They simply noticed one thing: qi will always fade. In 684 BC, the state of Qi marched on Lu. On the battlefield, Qi's army beat their drums first. Their momentum was overwhelming. The Duke of Lu wanted to respond immediately, but an advisor named Cao Gui held him back. Wait! After Qi's drums had sounded 3 times, Cao Gui finally said, "Now." Lu's army charged, and Qi's forces collapsed. The Duke didn't understand. Cao Gui explained their qi was bent. Ours was still full. That's why we won. What Cao Gui was watching wasn't the strength of the 2 armies. It was the rise and fall of their qi. He knew that a person's energy cannot stay at its peak indefinitely. She fades, and often faster than most people expect. Cao Gui spoke of qi, not willpower, not resolve, not determination. This wasn't a coincidence. In ancient Chinese thought, qi was the core concept for describing a person's inner state. Sun Tzu wrote, "Morning qi is sharp. Midday qi grows sluggish. Evening qi returns to rest." The ancients noticed that people, like armies, go through natural cycles of energy, high and low. So military strategy wasn't just about tactics. It was about how to manage qi. Mencius said, "I am good at cultivating my vast qi." This kind of qi isn't a sudden burst of passion. It's a state built up slowly, over a long time. That's almost the opposite of 一鼓作气. One is an explosion in a moment. The other is something grown over years. Modern people tend to explain persistence through willpower. The idea that if you're committed enough, you can push through. Ancient Chinese thinkers explained it through qi, something that rises and falls naturally, not a sign of weakness, but simply how things work. These 2 ways of thinking lead to very different responses when things get hard. With willpower, when your qi fades, you just tell yourself to push harder. With qi, when your qi fades, you first accept that this is normal, and then you look for ways to let it gather again. When people take on something long-term, they usually start with their qi at its highest. Then it begins to fade. And when that happens, most people do one thing. They tell themselves to try harder, to be more disciplined, to just keep going. But that's responding to the third drumbeat with the energy of the first. What Cao Gui understood was this. When qi is bent, you can't force it. You have to wait or create a moment for it to rebuild. The difference between someone who keeps going and someone who doesn't isn't who can push harder. It's who knows how to tend their qi. Most people manage their time. Very few pay attention to their qi. But what actually limits a person is rarely how much time they have. It's how much of that time they can spend in a good state. The way to let qi rebuild is different for everyone. It might be a small piece of progress, a moment of genuine feedback, or simply breaking a distant goal into something you can actually finish today. During his years of exile at Longchang, Wang Yangming had no recognition, no external reward of any kind. What he did was treat each these small thoughts and insights as real progress. He didn't wait for a big breakthrough. He didn't wait for outside acknowledgement. He turned those long years into small, daily milestones. Each one something he could actually reach. It was those reachable points that kept the long years from feeling like nothing but waiting. Bit by bit, not forcing it, but gradually letting his qi gather again. 一个做qi，再而shuai. Synergy, the ancients were talking about a battlefield. They were observing human nature more than 2,000 years ago. Cao Gui saw this on the battlefield. He didn't let loose army clash with qi at full force. He waited for the moment when qi could be gathered again, then struck. Today we talk about willpower, discipline, perseverance. The ancient Chinese talked about qi. That one difference in the language points to two very different ways of understanding. Not forcing yourself to keep burning, but learning to let your qi come back again and again. A lot of people spend their whole lives waiting for the next wave of excitement to carry them forward. But the people who actually change things stopped depending on that a long time ago. The ancient Chinese always knew qi will fade. The real masters are never the ones whose qi stays high. They're the ones who know every time it fades how to let it gather again.